Hi there, I'm Ken Lammers. This is Commonplace Catholic, and this week we're going to discuss the history of prejudice against the Catholic Church in the United States. So let's get to it.
Lord Jesus Christ.
युगान युग तेरा ही है.
Ilekroć bowiem sprawujemy pamiątkę ofiary Chrystusa,
Kweli ni vema na haki tukushukuru daima na popote, Bwana Baba mwema.
主の御体と御血になりますように。
Okay, so the United States from founding and actually pre-founding was, founded by a bunch of people that were fleeing Europe, and they were quite often people who were fleeing religious oppression. If they were from England, probably the Church of England, but the background, of course, for everything is there's this huge conflict in Europe for hundreds of years about Catholics and Protestants. Both sides are doing things to each other and killing each other off in job lots and having monstrous wars about all this. And you got people who are abusing religious beliefs. A prince wants to break free from the Holy Roman Empire. Well, he suddenly becomes Lutheran, right? So that he can use that as a lever to get clear of the Catholic Holy Roman Empire, right? And that sort of abuse by not really politicians, by the nobility of religion happened all the time as well. It's a great lever to push when you got to get a whole bunch of people together to fight against somebody who previously they were supposed to be on the side of, right? And so you had all that sort of stuff going on. And, I've had more than one person tell me, my people came to the United States because of Catholic oppression in Europe. Well, okay, probably. I think there's a good chance you're going to find, if you really dug into like my history, my people came to the States or Catholic Germans came to the States because of maybe Lutheran oppression in certain areas, that sort of thing. And can't say I've researched that, so don't quote me on that. But, in general, most of the people that came to the States were Protestants, and it reflected that, right? And it reflected the ongoing conflict at the time between the Church of England and the Catholic Church and kings and who was going to be in power and all that sort of thing, right? There was a big, heavy Catholics are not good thing going on in the United States. And I thought I'd just research this and it'd take like 10 minutes and, I'd get a little bit of stuff, put it up here and we'd be gone. This is just like a black hole that never stops. I mean, you keep finding more and more and more stuff. It's amazing. But in the United States, it has been, for a long period of time, fairly anti-Catholic. And so let's go through this and show, and look, I'm not trying to cause a grudge. I love my Protestant, or actually I'm not supposed to be Protestant anymore, separated brethren, friends, and, Orthodox and everybody else, Jewish, Islamic, whoever you are, I love y'all. But, this is what has gone on with the Catholic faith in the United States. So, let's start out in pre-colonial times. Now, there were several states that had laws against Catholics. But the furthest back I can find are the Virginia laws. And in Virginia, in 1641, if you tried to run for office and you were Catholic, you were fined 1,000 pounds of tobacco. In 1642, Virginia threw all Catholic priests out of the state. You could not be in. They gave 5 days. Gave Catholic priests 5 days to get out of Virginia. 1699, Catholics were denied the right to vote. 1705, Catholics were declared incompetent as witnesses, which meant you couldn't testify at a trial, right? This was what was going on in Virginia, in the colony of Virginia. Now, this is not unique to Virginia, not entirely unique to Virginia. It's happening in other states too. Massachusetts passed, I think in 1647 and 1700, laws saying that priests were in Massachusetts were subject to imprisonment and possibly execution. Okay, South Carolina, 1697, there was a religious liberty law passed, except for papists. And those of you who are not used to religious slurs, that's a religious slur for Catholics generally. Now, say that it's not all black. There were fights and attempts to make room for Catholics. Maryland was the first place that actually had a allowance for Catholic. And Maryland's where you start the religious freedom journey in the United States. Although it won't sound as much, but but I'm going to read this. In 1649, Maryland passed the Toleration Act. Be it also by the Lord Proprietary, with the advice and consent of this assembly, ordained and enacted, except as in this present act is before declared and set forth, that no person or persons whatsoever within this province or the islands, ports, harbors, creeks, or havens thereunto belonging, professing to believe in Jesus Christ, shall from henceforth be any ways troubled, molested, or discountenanced for or in respect of his or her religion, nor in the free exercise thereof, within this province or the islands thereunto belonging, nor any way compelled to the beliefs or exercises of any other religion, against his or her consent, so as they be not unfaithful to the Lord Proprietary, or molest or conspire against the civil government established or to be established in this province under him or his heirs. So, that's not what we think of when we think of a religious freedom statute or clause in the Constitution. But at the time, this was pretty doggone progressive. You just had to believe in Jesus Christ. You didn't have to be Catholic or Protestant or whatever. And that was, now, of course, they didn't make room for Jewish people. They didn't make room for Muslims, who I think at the time they probably would have called Mohammedans. But as far as it went, it was forward thinking at the time. So, of course, the very next year, the Puritans in Maryland rebelled because of this and overthrew it and said, nope, that's gone. And they held sway until 1658 when they were suppressed. It's like, nope. And then that Tolerance Act came back. And for the next 30 years, it was in place. But then in 1688, at the same time as something was going on in England about fighting whether it would be Protestant or Catholic, Protestants rose in Maryland and finally and fully killed the Toleration Act. So Maryland was the first to try, but it didn't get there. The first state in the United States, of course at the time a colony, which got there with religious freedom, at least as long as you believed in Jesus, was Pennsylvania. And in the 1701 Charter of Privileges, the Pennsylvania colony declared all religions good to go, right? And I'd like to say that this was through Catholic efforts or something like that, but I'd be lying to you. What it was that they had Quakers, and the Quakers were very tolerant. A lot of Quakers in Pennsylvania, and they were very tolerant of religions. And therefore, they put forth themselves that it's all good, and this was the first place where you actually got religious freedom. So that's pretty impressive, but that was colonial times. Now, of course, we don't really aren't as responsible for colonial time stuff as we are once the country was actually founded. So let's look to see where things were when the country was founded. Okay, when the country was founded, there were, in many constitutions of the United States, things that said you had to be Protestant to hold office, etc. So, now, okay, let's see. Georgia was the shortest one. The representatives shall be of the Protestant religion. And that went into being in 1777, and I think it was in part of their constitution until 1835. New Jersey. No Protestant inhabitant of this colony shall be denied the enjoyment of any civil right. That's 1776. New Hampshire. Every member of the House of Representatives shall be Protestant religion. No person shall be capable of being elected a senator who is not of Protestant religion. The president shall be of Protestant religion. So all of them have to be Protestant. North Carolina. No person who shall deny the being of God or the truth of the Protestant religion can hold office. And then Vermont. Now they had to take a particular oath to hold office. I state your name. Do believe in one God, the Creator and Governor of the diverse. That's probably meant to be universe. The rewarder of the good and punisher of the wicked. I do acknowledge the scriptures in the Old New Testament to be given by divine inspiration, and own and profess the Protestant religion. So that's where our state constitutions were. A lot of our state constitutions were. And to be clear, understand that this is way before the 14th Amendment was ever put in place. And it actually, at this time, is before we actually had the Constitution. We were still under the Articles of Confederacy at this point. But, these, until the 14th Amendment, these state constitutions were the law. There was no overruling them with the Constitution of the United States. So you had to be Protestant in a lot of these states. So at least, or at least it was put in, you probably had to be Protestant no matter what in most every state. But these states were at least honest about it and put it in their constitutions. So then we get to pre-Civil War times. Oh, wait, let me say one thing first. In 1786, Virginia did pass the Act for Religious Freedom, and it gets put into Virginia's Constitution, which is great and awesome, except for the fact that other parts of the Constitution are specifically written to affect religions. So we'll get to that part a little bit later, but there it is. So in pre-Civil War stuff, now in the pre-Civil War era, we had a party that from in the 1840s to 1860s the official name was the American Party, originally the Nativist American Party, the American Party, and they were known pretty much as the Know-Nothings, because if you asked them something about their political party, they answered, I don't know anything, right? Now they were afraid, at least the way they put it forth, that bishops and priests would absolutely control the Catholic voters, and Catholic voters would always vote exactly as their bishop or priest told them to. I'm not sure if they'd ever met an Ireland. I think there's bishops and priests through time that would love to have had that kind of control, but no. And understand, to understand what's causing all this, there were a lot of German immigrants coming in and a lot of Irish immigrants coming in at that time, right? The Irish were pretty much 100% Catholic, and the Germans were large part Catholic, but also Lutheran. But what was the one thing that the Know-Nothings could really tag both the Irish and Germans on? Catholic. They were Catholic. And therefore they, that's what they counted them on, Now this party eventually falls apart over slavery in the 1860s, somewhere around there. And some of them go to the Republican Party, others go to some other party in the South that died out later. But they were around and they were pretty significant. They got at their high point in 1854, they had 52 members of the House, and 1856, 5 members of the Senate, the U.S. Senate, right? So they became a fairly significant party. This was when the Whigs were falling apart and parties were jockeying to take that place. The Republicans eventually got there. But now, okay, so you're like, well, it's a political party. They cause noise and all that. Well, no, unless you think that there was nothing of consequence here. In this, I first found out about this from the Kentucky Encyclopedia. I don't know if they publish this thing anymore, but I've owned this thing since probably high school. Something called Bloody Monday. And that was on 6th of August, 1855. It was an election day. And the Know Nothings controlled the polls, and they were blocking out the Germans and the Irish so they couldn't vote. And then that led to further conflict, and the Know Nothings, armed with rifles and pistols, etc., went after the St. Martin of Tours church in Louisville. An armed crowd shows up there, and Catholics are fleeing into the church and that. And the mayor of Louisville is said to have, who was also a Know Nothing, said to have stopped them from attacking the church, destroying the church, and killing the people. Okay, fine. Then later in the day, in an Irish neighborhood, they jump some Irish guys, and Irish shoot at them out their windows of their houses, and that leads to further fighting. There's stories of an Irishman who was both shot and hung and survived. I'm sure his other name is Kal-El, but that sort of thing. Later on that night, they burnt I think it was the same neighborhood. They just burned it down. This is row housing, right? So you catch one house on fire, all gone, right? A whole bunch of houses burned down. And again, there's a cathedral in Louisville, and they went to go destroy the cathedral, and again, the mayor apparently intervened and stopped that. So, at the end of the day, depending on who you believe, if you believe like what the historians say, which is based upon like the newspapers of the time, which of course were not Catholic, 19 to 22 people dead. If you believe what the Catholics at the time were saying, there was over 100 dead. So this was not an insignificant thing with the Know Nothings. This is what they were doing. By the way, the consequences of this, at least from what I've read, was that Louisville lost like a third of its population. 10,000 people left. And depending on who you believe, and I don't know how you could prove this, Louisville went from being, pretty much in competition with Cincinnati and St. Louis to become the portal to the West to not being in the running anymore, right? So that's pre-Civil War. So then there comes this war, and things aren't as thought of. And then we get to the post-Civil War era. In the post-Civil War era, we get the Blaine Amendments. Now, this has been probably the most pernicious thing and lasted for years and years and years until just the last few years it's been thrown out or found unconstitutional. But there was a representative, actually it was a Speaker of the House in D.C., from Maine, named James G. Blaine. And Blaine tried to pass a constitutional amendment to the U.S. Constitution that said all states in that had to have public schools, and that they had to deny any sectarian schools, which means religious schools, any kind of funding. He tried to get that through for the U.S. Constitution and made it through the House, but it failed in the Senate. The Senate rejected it. Now, to be clear, here's the reason for this. The idea was, Catholic Church was setting up schools everywhere to teach Catholics or whomever, and they wanted to shut those down, forced Catholics to go into the Protestant schools, which were the public schools, and we would all become good Protestants that way, right? That's kind of simplifying it, but that's kind of the way it is. I can tell you, my father grew up in Cincinnati. When he was growing up, he was Protestant. He converted later, and he makes no bones about it. When he was a kid, there were Protestant schools, and those were the public schools, and then there were the Catholic schools, right? And Cincinnati, being what it was, had a lot of Catholic schools, but it was very clear. Protestants went to the public schools, Catholics went to the Catholic schools, if they could get there, right? And I can tell you, like I went through junior high school and high school in the late 70s, early 80s, and there were still biases in the teachings, what they taught you. We were taught, I remember being taught this in textbooks, that the reason the United States had succeeded so well was the Protestant work ethic. Never mind all those, Irish and German and Polish people up north working in the steel mills and all that sort of thing, or, as I remember being taught about the Jamestown settlements about to fail until a bunch of Irish folks showed up and got it on the right track. Wonder what faith they were, but it was the Protestant work ethic that made the United States great, right? I remember being taught that. I remember being taught things like, the reason that the King James Bible was brought into existence was because the Catholic Church wouldn't allow any English Bibles to be made. I didn't find out that was a lie until years later when I found out about the Douay-Rheims Bible, which existed before the King James, right? So, there were still hangovers of that when I was in school, some Protestant biases. Okay, so that was the plan. We're going to force them all into that. It failed in the U.S. So the U.S. it's not in the U.S. Constitution. So then Blaine and his allies, now Blaine didn't do all this himself, matter of fact, some of this happened before Blaine got involved, switched to the states to get it into the state constitutions. So here's what we've got. Like in 1877, a Blaine Amendment goes into New Hampshire. Virginia, 1870. See, so in some places it happened before Blaine was actually trying to get it passed in Congress. Again, in 1858 in Minnesota, clearly before Blaine was trying to get it in as a U.S. constitutional amendment. And then, of course, there's Delaware, 1897, Louisiana, same year. And so it's all, it got passed in 37 state constitutions. It was put in place. 37 of them. So this has been went in place for years, right? All these schools, I was personally affected by this, right? I was in college and I had something, Pell Grant? I don't know. I had some sort of grant from Kentucky to go to school at the school I was going to. When I declared myself to be a religion major, I have two majors, religion and international studies. When I declared myself to be a religion major, Kentucky pulled all funding from me. I could no longer get this grant from Kentucky. I was a Catholic at a school that had been founded by Presbyterians who was translating Arabic and Hebrew to compare Islamic and Judaic texts on Abraham. I wasn't trying to become a priest or a preacher. And, they just, because it had anything to do with religion, boom, gone, right? So, this stuff has real world effects. 37 states. And then, until, what finally got it killed was in more modern times when, the public schools went from being Protestant to being secular, and anti-religion pretty much goes through in most of these secular schools. Then the Protestants are in the same spot the Catholics were, and they start trying to make schools, and things go badly, and then things go to the Supreme Court, and fixes start being made. The first is probably Trinity Lutheran against Comer. That's 2014, I think it was. And 2014, I can't remember what city it was or anything, but the government said, okay, I think it was Chicago maybe, said, okay, we're gonna allow all schools, public or private, have a chance to get this grant to fix up playgrounds. Trinity Lutheran had like an elementary school, they had a playground, they put in for the grant, they were the most qualified or among the most qualified, should have gotten the grant, but they were rejected because of the Blaine Amendment in their state constitution. We can't give it to you because you're a religious school. That goes up to the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court of the United States goes, no, that's disfavoring them because of religion. You can't favor them because of religion, but you also can't disfavor them because of religion. This is a neutral thing. You're not you're not giving them money to go teach somebody about religion. You're giving them money to make the slides work better, right, in the playground. So, no, you cannot do that. And that was pretty plain. And you would have thought that would have been the death knell of the Blaine Amendments, but no, it held on everywhere. There were excuses to why these should still be in state constitutions and laws. And then, so it comes back again in 2020. Espinoza against Montana Department of Revenue. This was, I think, Colorado, I think, or Montana, God bless. Montana had passed a law saying you can get $150 if your kid's going to private school. Right? I don't know if it was by semester, per year, whatever. You get $150, and whoever was going to this school, going to a private Christian school, said, "Okay, I want that money." And they said, "Nope, you can't have it because you're going to a Christian school." And that goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, "No, you cannot. You're not required to fund any private schools. However, should you fund private schools, you cannot say, yes, we're going to give this one money because it's private, but it's not religious. We're not going to give that one the money, because it's religious." You have to have the same test. If this school has the academics that allow it, and this school has the academics allowed, we don't care if one of them's religious, one is not. You got to allow the same scholarship for both of them, and that is the death knell of the Blaine Amendments. You would think they'd be gone. And as a matter of fact, I heard through the grapevine, just pure hearsay, that Kentucky was getting rid of theirs this year. And bravo, if you are, that means you're keeping up with U.S. constitutional law, which, because there's a 14th Amendment, trumps your state's constitutional law. So I went and looked at the Virginia Constitution, where I live, and they still have the illegal stuff, unconstitutional stuff, federally unconstitutional stuff in Virginia's Constitution. And I quote to you, Article 4, Legislature, Section 16, Appropriations to Religious or Charitable Bodies. General Assembly may make appropriations to non-sectarian institutions for the reform of youthful criminals, and so can localities. Clearly unconstitutional. Article 8, Education, Section 10. General Assembly may, and government bodies of localities, may appropriate funds for educational purposes for education of Virginia students in public and non-sectarian private schools and institutions of learning. Again, non-sectarian. Again, unconstitutional. Counties, cities, and towns, later on, counties, cities, towns, and districts may make appropriations to non-sectarian schools of manual, industrial, or technical training. Again, unconstitutional. If you're teaching somebody to fix a car, and your school is, Catholic, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Baptist, fixing a car is fixing a car, right? It is not constitutional to deny that money to a religious school that's doing the same thing as this private school over here. Other private school over here. So Virginia is still outside of the Constitution of the United States. And still, Virginia is very proud of the fact that it has religious freedom. Its first statute to protect religion and went into its Constitution, then was basically used as a model for what went in the federal Constitution. Virginia's very proud of that, and they probably should be, except for the fact that this exists, which was clearly meant to be an anti-Catholic thing, and now is affecting Protestant religious schools as well, but God bless. Okay, so let's move on from there. We get to pre-World War I. I didn't even know about this until I started doing research for this. Prior to World War I, several states, a lot of states apparently, looked at, but I only found 4 that passed convent inspection laws. Now, to be fair, they covered convents, monasteries. another religious thing I can't remember, but they talked about, and then they would talk about like asylums and stuff too. But they were clearly aimed at convents. And this was passed in several states. First state apparently passed it was Arkansas, and it was on their books from 1915, and then kind of repealed in 1937. Florida, 1917. Georgia, 1917. But apparently Georgia's Supreme Court said that's not legal under our Constitution in 1919. And then Alabama in 1919. Now I'm assuming that Alabama and Florida have repealed this, at least as far as it goes. Now, what these were things that allowed either grand juries, or if a group of citizens, 12, 20, something like that, filed a complaint, allowed a local sheriff to inspect and question people at convents without any probable cause, without any search warrant, without anything. Just go in and inspect, right? Now, where'd this come from? Well, this came from a guy named Tom Watson. Tom Watson, he was a U.S. representative, and at the end of his life, he was a U.S. senator. He died as a U.S. senator. However, he was also a publisher in Georgia. And in 1910, he starts publishing in his magazines and newspapers all these kind of salacious stories about what's going on in convents and with Catholics and all that, right? He's claiming that nuns are having babies in the convents and just killing them, that there are women being held in convents against their will, particularly Protestant women that are being kidnapped, I guess, and forced in, that priests are going to the convents so they can have S&M sex parties with the nuns. And to top it all off, well, this isn't really part of the convent, that priests are raping women in the confessional boxes, which is kind of difficult since they're in locked different boxes, but okay. So he starts doing this in Georgia in 1910. He gets picked up by another magazine called The Menace, which was about the Catholic menace, obviously. That was a nationwide magazine, I think with over like 1 million subscribers. And they just go with it, right? And there were other magazines that did the same thing. And this led to, the Convent Inspection Acts, that sort of thing. I'd never heard of this before. This was a new one on me. So that happens pre-World War I. Actually, that should say post-World War I up there, but pre-World War II. Well, it's post-World War I too. Al Smith, the first Catholic to ever run for president. And throughout his run for president, he had other things thrown at him, like he was a tool of Tammany Hall, which is the political machine in New York, or that he was pro-alcohol, which was a terrible, evil thing, and that, should be done away with, period. And he was a papist, a Catholic. He will be controlled by his, the Pope will run the country. The Pope and the bishops, they'll be controlled by them. And for those of you who doubt this, here are a couple of cartoons. That's Al Smith supposedly kneeling to a bishop, I think it is. And that's Al Smith there with the cross across his chest. It says Romanism, and different things. There's shadows of crosses and beer bottles and all sorts of stuff there. There are others too. I saw another one where there was like the Pope and a bunch of bishops sitting around saying this is his cabinet, Al Smith's cabinet. So they went after him hard about being Catholic. Now, obviously, Al Smith did not win as Catholic. Obviously, I think we all know that. But he was the first one to ran, and they hit him pretty hard. So then, post-World War II, we get to JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He's running for president of the United States and and as a Democrat, and he's getting hammered because he's Catholic, right? He will do what the Pope tells him to do and all that. He has to go to Houston to some sort of get together of a bunch of Protestant ministers, and he has to basically take a loyalty oath. He has to stand in front of them, and it goes on for over 10 minutes, as I recall, and take a loyalty oath saying, I won't do what the church tells me to do. I will do what I'm supposed to do as an American. And he just goes on. I'll give you, here's pretty much the punchline of it right here.
For contrary to common newspaper usage, I am not the Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic Party's candidate for president, who happens also to be a Catholic. I do not speak for my church on public matters, and the church does not speak for me. Whatever issue may come before me as president, if I should be elected, on birth control, divorce, censorship, gambling, or any other subject, I will make my decision in accordance with these views, in accordance with what my conscience tells me to be in the national interest, and without regard to outside religious pressure or dictates. And no power or threat of punishment could cause me to decide otherwise. But if the time should ever come, and I do not concede any conflict to be remotely possible, when my office would require me to either violate my conscience or violate the national interest, then I would resign the office, and I hope any other conscientious public servant would do likewise. But I do not intend to apologize for these views to my critics of either Catholic or Protestant faith, nor do I intend to disavow either my views or my church in order to win this election. If I should lose on the real issues, I shall return to my seat in the Senate, satisfied that I tried my best and was fairly judged. But if this election is decided on the basis that 40 million Americans lost their chance of being president on the day they were baptized, then it is the whole nation that will be the loser in the eyes of Catholics and non-Catholics around the world, in the eyes of history, and in the eyes of our own people.
Okay, so, that seems reasonable, and he does as best you can as a politician. He really makes the best of it. But just imagine, if somebody had to go in front of a bunch of Protestant and or Catholic priests and Protestant ministers and go, I know that I am a Southern Baptist, but I will not let the Southern Baptist Convention affect my loyalties to the United States, right? You see that happening, or a Lutheran, or a Presbyterian, or Episcopalian, anything like that? Do you see that happening? I don't. So it is rather insulting. Now, obviously, when we had a Catholic president since then, he didn't have to do that. But then, of course, he didn't follow the teachings of the church too much. So, that's where that is. Well, JFK may not have been the greatest Catholic either, but nobody else has to do this loyalty oath thing that JFK had to do. And that's where I'm going to leave it, folks. There's as I dig, I find more and more and more stuff. You just can't stop finding stuff. The Knights of Columbus, which is a Catholic male fraternity group. Why was it founded? It was founded because Protestants wouldn't give any kind of insurance to Catholics. There was a province in Canada that was founded by Catholics who were then driven out by force of arms after the province was founded. You just keep digging. You keep finding this stuff. And you can find more and more of it. It's not really fruitful to keep digging and to find more. At this point, I think we are pretty much where all Christian faiths are at the moment. Kind of over in the corner, kind of being told, stay over there, out of the way, and having to fight back to say, no, we deserve to be in the mainstream just as much as you do. Right? And so are all the Protestant churches. And so it's not the same as it was back in the day. The problem with something like this is you look at it and you see over and over and over and over again why the prejudices against the church. And then you look at modern problems like the sexual abuse problem in the church. And you go, oh crud, I understand why they tried to hide it. It was the wrong thing to do, but I understand it better now because you know that's going to be used as a club. And then you look at how it turned out. You know, how much of this is for real? How much of it, if this sort of thing had happened with, a Baptist minister or a Presbyterian minister or something, would the same deals have been made about it, right? That's as far as I'm going to go today. And if you like what you're seeing here today, hit the like button so more people can see this and kind of see where Catholics come from in the United States, right? If you like what you see around here generally, hit subscribe and hit the bell so you get notifications when I put something up. That's it. Very clearly, there is no imprimatur here, right? Nobody from the church has said, Ken, go out and find all the bad things that have happened to the Catholic Church, or as many as you can. It's not what the church is about. The church is about bringing people to God through grace, right? And, again, but nobody's told me not to do this either, right? They're not about suppressing things either, at least not much anymore. So, take from what you will from this. I invite you to do your own research. I guarantee you, this is research done in like a day. Anybody who does more research, more in depth, will find some incongruities with what I've said, or will find things that I didn't find, right? I invite you to go do the research yourself and look into this. And on that wonderfully high point, I'm going to end for today. Go with peace, and I'll see you next week.